Is Cyberpunk 2077 finally worth playing? There's a big new patch out today, patch 1.5, and with it comes the long-promised and long overdue and repeatedly delayed so-called next-gen update. We're going to take a walk through some of the big things that might make this game worth looking at again for those of you who gave up on it after its miserable launch, or those of you who decided to wait. Rather wisely, as it turned out. It's also on sale right now for like half price, and for the first time ever there's a free demo, but you only get a free demo if you are an owner of a next-gen console, and only for 30 days, and only for a 5-hour-long stint, which frankly is barely enough to get into the meat of the game. So, pretty friggin' restrictive and shitty as far as trials and demos go. You'd think CD Projekt Red would work a bit harder to win back some good faith, because their reputation is in the garbage, right at the bottom of the garbage, with all the garbage juice. So putting out a free trial and limiting it so severely is, well, it's not the way to go as far as I'm concerned. And before all of you CDPR fanboys with your reactionary gibberish start trying to slag me off because you've detected a negative tone already, let me say this. I played the game at launch. I played on PC, the least buggy and best performing version. I played on high-end hardware, so it ran the best it could possibly run. And I personally only had a couple of crashes and hit a few little bugs along the way. I think the game itself is worth playing for its content, for the story, for the characters, for the missions, for the side quests. It's all fun. What let it down was, of course, everything else around it, not limited to just the lies that CD Projekt Red told in the lead up to launch, but everything they did after launch and through launch. All of that was really shitty, and it kind of left a real sour taste in my mouth, and not just mine. But before we dive into the patch changes that might make it worth finally playing for those who did wait, or for those like me have been very patiently waiting for enough patching to happen to make our desire for a second full playthrough actually worthwhile, let's frame all this up for some perspective. By the way, I am Blunty. Thank you for doing the things with the thumb and the subs and the bells and the comments along the way, if you would be so kind. So, it has been 1 year, 2 months, 5 days since Cyberpunk 2077 launched after immense, and it turned out immensely overblown, hype. And even after multiple delays and launch pushbacks, it launched absolutely plagued with bugs, with broken promises, with bugs, with missing features, with bugs, with missing content, with wildly idiotic NPC AI behaviors, with bugs, with immersion-smashing garbage and some bugs, and absolutely on-fire garbage performance on anybody who tried to play it on consoles. Oh, and a few bugs. Did I mention it was quite buggy? Anyway, today, as I opened with, CD Projekt Red have announced the latest in a long line of updates, patch 1.5, making for 16 patches in all since launch, averaging a little over a patch a month, and most have been what they call hotfixes for literal game-breaking crap. 4 have been considered major patches. This is one of those they consider a major patch. And if you think 14 months worth of constant patching and fiddling and tweaking and hotfixes, that they'd have the game pretty much fixed up at this point, and they'd just be doing some polishing crap and adding new content and the like. But the patch notes are always huge, with massive lists of bugs they are still working on. And a lot of the time the stuff they're talking about, they don't say fixed, they say improved or reduced. So they're still ironing the basic shit out. And this patch is no different than that. While just recording some background footage from the PS5 trial edition, for example, I found a few visual bugs already, even some dumb stuff that's been there since day one, like an NPC sitting on a stool that isn't there, or guns flailing about the cabin of a car in a hand that shouldn't be holding a gun because they're driving. Shit like that. Basic shit. Still happening in this latest patch. But that is how buggy, incomplete, and broken this game was and has been since launch. 14 months later, and they're still trying to fix basic bitch crap like NPCs reacting to danger properly, or spawning in more than one vehicle, making it glitch out so badly it fires into low Earth orbit or explodes instantly. Which, until this patch, is a thing that can still happen. Or how about this? These patch notes, 14 months after launch, they're still fixing stuff like NPCs just T-posing and sliding around the place in a T-pose. They are still trying to fix this shit. It is still broken. It is still buggy. So, with that framing done and the bile cleared from my throat, let's see about these next-gen patch notes. The next-gen consoles get ray tracing. That's awesome, except it's not the ray tracing you get on PCs, because the ray tracing accelerating hardware on the console chips is nowhere near as powerful enough for that. Instead, you get ray traced local light shadows, which is not nothing, it's just, well, you know, it's nice. It's a very pleasant visual improvement, but hardly a selling point, especially compared to the more extensive, proper, immersive ray tracing you get on PC. And if you do turn on the ray tracing, you're jammed down at 30 FPS. There's also some non-ray traced screen space reflections improvements to help things look cleaner on shiny surfaces and bring back some of that immersion. Xbox Series S doesn't get any ray tracing, of course, and it is still capped at 30 FPS regardless, but it does get a 1440p scaling resolution mode and the SSR improvements. PlayStation gets exposed again, being a clusterfuck of technical user-facing ineptitudes. As it turns out, if you are a PS5 player, upgrading your PS4 install to get all the nice new stuff on the next-gen update, all of your trophies get nuked. Erased. Because the PlayStation don't do things smart like Xbox do when it comes to this kind of generational upgrade. Xbox has smart delivery, so all of your achievements remain perfectly synced. Everything you've earned remains earned. But on to the actual more important stuff. Both the PS5 and the Series X get dynamic 4K, which means, I feel safe in assuming, it will almost never be true 4K, but technically they can call it 4K because it'll scale there sometimes under especially low load conditions when you're not moving on stuff like that. Typical console marketing spin, but 4K-ish is still better than what we had. Better than that though, it'll also hit 60 FPS in your performance mode, so you'll turn off the ray tracing stuff, which again is only shadows, so who really cares that much? I'd rather play in 60 FPS than have ray trace shadows, quite frankly. Though elsewhere in the patch notes, it does note there's still FPS drops, so it's not even 60 FPS locked, and rendering quality issues still exist as well. They spin this by saying they've decreased the number of times FPS drops and resolution issues happen, which of course means it'll still happen. It's just doesn't happen as much as it used to. On the graphical charts they made for Easy Digest on social media, they claim they're small and rare. See about that. But at least at targeting 60 FPS, those kinds of FPS drops are a lot less jarring than they were when the console version was capped at 30 FPS regardless. PS5 gets activity cards. Then I want you to be honest with me here, guys. If you use a PS5 to game on, how often have you ever used the activity card feature? Because I literally, and I mean literally, never have. Not once. Such a stupid feature. Also, PS5 users get haptic feedback on those battery-draining trigger rumblers Sony jammed in there. More often than not, I personally find that feature extremely distracting rather than immersive, but I have a mate who says she absolutely loves it, so to each their own on that one. In recording some footage for this, I installed the demo version on my PS5, and all I can tell you is it feels as gimmicky as it always does, in my opinion. While shooting, while driving, it's kind of handy when you're throwing a knife. It will stop you sort of auto-targeting until the knife is back in your inventory. That's another change, by the way. We'll come back to that one later. Also on the PS5 gimmick list, the controller's built-in speaker can be used for holo calls, text messages, and everything that happens in V's head, essentially. Another feature I really hate and always turn off whenever it's an option in a PS5 game, because it's such a shitty, teeny little speaker, I find it much harder to hear anything that gets shoved through it. The patch notes don't mention this, but it is, thankfully, optional. But past this stuff is the general improvements on all platforms, almost all platforms. Again, we'll come to that. There are some caveats here. And here's where we start talking about whether it's actually worth trying now, because these are the real improvements. At the top of their patch notes after the next-gen stuff is extra content. But if the game is still too balked to bother with, who cares about extra content, quite frankly? But amongst the extra content is some useful stuff. Amongst it, being able to buy apartments and decorate the standard one a little bit, which, who cares, really? There's literally no good reason to be in your apartment aside from inventory management, right? Wrong! There is now. Interactions in the apartment can give temporary buffs, like taking a shower gives you refreshed for an hour, which regens health during combat up to 60% of your max, so that's not nothing. It also stacks with other regen perks you might have on your gear. Nice. If you take a nap in your bed, you get a Fallout-style rested perk for extra skill XP gain. Make a coffee, and you're energized for an hour for extra stamina and better stamina regen. So there's reasons to go to your apartment and do things now for extra immersion. Take a shower, take a nap, have a coffee, head out again, feel refreshed and ready to go. I like that. Oh, and that mirror in your apartment, you can actually use it now to make some cosmetic changes. You can change your hair, your makeup, all that sort of stuff. But that is another dirt basic RPG game feature that players have been begging for since day one, and its lack of inclusion to this date has been a mystery I cannot fathom. How hard is it? But we have it now, so there you go. They've added in some new weapons, which is, yeah, fine, whatever. New poses for photo mode, yeah, fine, whatever. I love photo mode, but that was hardly a pain point for the game. But then we get to more important stuff, proper gameplay stuff, more immersion stuff. One of the most immersion-breaking things about the game was how the NPCs and AI worked. Crowds were idiotic. Police magically teleported directly behind you the instant you did anything remotely, slightly even kind of wrong. The enemy combatants were dumb beyond reason, which quite often made exploiting combat situations ridiculously easy, sucking some of the fun out, really. This patch claims to fix a bunch of stuff like that, and previous patches have claimed this as well, for the record. I think the most recent big patch before this claimed to fix the police stuff, but I didn't actually check in on it then. But now, enemy NPCs in battle will do things like take cover. Remarkable. Groundbreaking gameplay. Enemy NPCs take cover. They reposition in a way that makes tactical sense. They reload their weapons. They visibly equip their weapons and weapon swaps. Oh, this is next-gen stuff, guys. This is amazing. Oh, yes, kids. These are all things that the game got wrong. And in a combat-focused ARPG, they're still fixing shit like enemies taking cover. It makes it a bit clownish, to be honest. And that's just one of those tip-of-the-iceberg things about how broken this game was at its most basic DNA level. There's a bunch of similar AI improvements around behaviors when dodging, when blocking, and even more, they're actually tied to how big and heavy their weapon is. So big, heavy weapons don't dodge quite as well, and light weapons, they dodge better and things like that. So it makes a little more logical sense when you're in combat and you can kind of predict behaviors a little bit better. Behaviors themselves are now more diversified into behavior sets like being reckless, or aggressive, or balanced, or defensive, or cautious. So that will make engaging groups of enemies a lot more interesting as well. They'll be a little bit harder to predict, a little bit harder to exploit, and you'll have to think on your feet a bit more, and that all sounds fun to me. Also, things like, if they're equipped with a shotgun, they'll actually try to get close enough to use a shotgun properly. And yes, that was also a thing you'd think they'd have got right on day one. Getting within short range to actually use a short range weapon, it seems like a no-brainer to me, but no, 14 months later, and they're just getting around to fixing that. This patch claims to improve the notoriously stupid crowd behaviors too. Certain NPC archetypes can and will enter combat with you when you do things like provoke them by aiming at them, shooting or fighting. You know, instead of doing what they used to do, just duck and cover and then despawn if you look away for a few seconds, like normally happens. But, hilariously, in their words on the patch notes, due to some technical challenges, this change is not available on the previous generation consoles. This is a next-gen move, guys. Having NPCs get angry when you point a gun at them, that's next-gen stuff. You can't do that on the old consoles. They're not powerful enough. I'm pretty sure I've seen mildly reactive NPC behavior in other games on older systems, on much older systems. I wonder what technical limitations and challenges they mean when they say the PS4 can't handle NPCs getting aggressive if you shoot them in the leg. It's fucking ludicrous, really. There's also some extensive notes on making driving better, which is good because holy crap was driving bad, like really bad. Now they've done things like you can do J-turns properly now because the transmissions work properly. Brakes work as you might expect them is another patch note. Christ. Also, extremely immersion smashing was how bad the NPC's drivers were. They had absolutely zero reaction to almost anything you did, so much so they would just plow right into you at any speed in any situation, even traffic lights. Even if they were stopped, if you stood in front of the car, they would just plow right over you as soon as the light turned green. It was absurdly stupid. Now, though, they claim traffic and cars and things like that have, let me read the patch notes here, turning and suspension, and the drivers will actually react to danger, so they can actually recover and return to traffic if they bump into another car instead of bugging out and going into brain dead zero mode and just sitting there forever until they despawn. And this was added in a previous patch that I didn't bother checking out. You can actually hijack cars now, GTA style, which you couldn't do when the game launched, which was another really really stupid thing that I never figured out why it was missing. They've done a bunch of fiddling with balance in the economy and with things like clothing and mods, and you can sell things you couldn't sell before, and none of this was a huge issue outside of a few edge cases of ultra meta meme builds, but it's nice to see them still tweaking the underpinning balance and economies for a smoother, more predictable experience when it comes to that kind of stuff. They've even completely replaced some stats, like basic stuff like evasion. You don't have evasion stat anymore. It's now been turned into two different stats, mitigation chance and mitigation strength, which seems a bit more nuanced to me. I like that. And now, instead of just having to leg it away from the cops as fast as possible with no other options at all should you get in trouble with the law, because, fighting them is pointless beyond belief because they just endlessly respawn behind you, now you can hide within a crime scene location and wait for them to give up if you're good enough at hiding. Now, I tried this in the OG game, not knowing it wasn't a thing that could be done, because I just assumed it would be a thing that could be done. And I got extremely frustrated by it not working at all. I hid for 15 minutes at a time, and the cops would just constantly roam around. They would never, ever, ever give up. Because I love it when it works in other games, like the Watch Dogs series, or GTA 5, of course. I love hiding until the heat is off, and then just strolling away with my smug face on, right past a pair of cops on the street corner and stuff like that. Well, now apparently that will work in this game, so that's nice. Furthering the gameplay balance stuff, there's a whole bunch of tweaks for hacking and cyberware and stuff like that. I actually didn't do much of that in my original playthrough, focusing instead more on a burst damage run and gun and stealth sniping build. But for my long put off second playthrough, I was planning to go more of a tech head style, so this was interesting to see. Oh, they also fixed throwing knives to actually make them practical instead of annoying. I mean, before it was somewhat logical in that if you threw a knife away, it would just go from your inventory. Now they kind of magically video gamey return to your inventory, which means using a knife is a little more practical, but a little bit less immersive depending on your taste. But I would prefer them to return to my inventory so I can just be the knife throwing guy for a while without having to actually carry 20,000 knives. There's also some UI and map improvements, which is also very, very welcome. The UI wasn't awful to begin with. I do remember having some issues with how cluttered and awkwardly organized it used to be and how weird the map was to use occasionally. But they've also fixed some stuff like scopes, another minor annoyance I had with my original playthrough. Some sniper scopes, they were really good and I wanted to do things they wanted to do, but they were really annoying to actually look through. So I wound up using worse options because using them didn't feel as shitty and stupid. Shooting your inventory now actually shows its stats properly. Another idiotically annoying oversight that they're just now getting around to fixing. There's a thing where you can now not be constantly interrupted by holo calls. So you can mute the NCPD stuff and it just automatically goes to your texts instead. You can reject non-essential incoming calls and get texts for that stuff instead. A bunch of stuff like that just to make the game stop getting in your way every couple of minutes so you can play uninterrupted by the game telling you, hey, there's other stuff to be playing. Oh, you're in the middle of something? Too bad. There's a long list of fixes for various quests and gigs, which you could still break for idiotic reasons. Yes, they're still fixing the basic quest stuff. They've made water apparently do watery things like splash and ripple when things like gunfire touch it. I tried that. It doesn't look very good. But at least it's something. It's something. They've made weather work more like real weather does, apparently, instead of being wildly immersion smashing by just kind of appearing out of nowhere for no reason and driving under a bridge would change the weather and things like that. For PC players, there's a new benchmark mode, which is nice because I like to use this game as a benchmark for when I tested and reviewed GPUs, and the difficulty in making comparative runs was always an issue. It will also help normal people fine-tune their settings a little bit better for more consistent performance, and that was another thing that was always a pain in the ass to test and repeat. So, all in all, Cyberpunk just might be worth trying at least, or coming back to, if like me you've been waiting for enough improvements to happen to make it worthwhile coming back to. And while it's at half price with all these patches, and with the Series X, Series S and PS5 all having a limited, very limited, but free trial, well, you can make the call for yourself. But like I said in the opening, I played it at launch on the least problematic platform, on very powerful hardware, and I really enjoyed the content despite the issues I hit, and others were hitting worse issues, but despite me having a relatively smooth playthrough, and my only issue being the immersion breaking stuff really, because of all the bullshit CDPR did around this title and around these issues and how they reacted to it and in the lead up to it and the fallout from it, I found it very hard to recommend this game to other people for them to spend their money on it. even though I did have fun with it. My mate played on console and hit a lot more buggy issues, crashes, and performance and graphical garbage than I did, and she still loved it too. So the guts of the game are good, and with this next-gen patch and stacked on top of all the other 14 months worth of patches and hotfixes, it just might be worth finally coming back to or taking a look at for the first time. Let me know what you think. What I can tell you though, even in the hour that I put through the PS5 demo to see what the console felt like these days, I still hit some bugs, some hitches, some very obvious graphical glitches, some real stupidity around AI and things like that. So, you know, shrug. Pity though that it's coming out now, don't you think? I think I'm going to wait to start my second Cyberpunk playthrough until I'm finished, or have at least given up by having my head kicked in on Elden Ring, which is the next big game I'm hoping will absorb me completely for a while. Thanks for watching. I am Blunty. Thank you as always to the patrons. Hopefully this video has been useful to you guys. If it has, I hope you've done the thing with the interaction stuff. I am Blunty. We'll catch you next time. Thanks for watching.